A pastor? A partner? A daughter? One man managed to betray them both. He preached about purity on Sunday mornings, but spent his nights guarding a secret that no one in his church could imagine. For 7 years, he kept his private life buried, until one birthday post blew it all open. It wasn't the photo that did the damage, it was who was in it: his daughter, his partner, and a child that tied them together forever. Within 48 hours, a man was dead, and the pastor who once laid hands in prayer was holding a gun. For nearly 3 decades, Pastor Myron Fushi led a growing congregation in Jacksonville, Florida. His sermons were bold, his reputation firm, and his voice carried weight across pulpits statewide. Known for his sharp suits, strict theology, and old-school discipline, Pastor Fushi was considered a man who kept his life in order, both spiritually and personally. Behind the scenes, however, the picture was far more complex. According to former church members and longtime associates, Fushi's personal life had been marked by quiet isolation since his divorce in the early 2000s. He rarely spoke about his past marriage, and when he did, it was only to mention that it had ended due to irreconcilable differences. Official records, however, showed that he filed for divorce shortly after catching his wife in a long-term affair with one of the church ushers. The situation caused a quiet internal scandal, but due to Fushi's strong influence and tight leadership structure, no formal inquiry was made. The usher was quietly relocated to a different ministry. The wife left the congregation entirely. As years passed, Fushi remained unmarried. While many assumed it was due to the betrayal he experienced, no one pressed for answers. He lived alone, stayed out of the public eye outside church functions, and poured himself into ministry work. It wasn't until much later that investigators uncovered the truth. Pastor Fushi had been in a long-term romantic relationship with a man named Devin. According to neighbors, Devin was introduced to them only as a boarder or relative. He was never seen at church events. No photos of the two existed publicly. Their relationship was carefully managed, and inside the church, nothing ever hinted at anything unusual. In private, however, the relationship spanned nearly 7 years. Digital forensics would later confirm shared devices, private message exchanges, and travel records, placing the two together on multiple out-of-state trips. Bank records showed joint hotel bookings under aliases and regular transfers between their accounts, always just small enough to avoid raising suspicion. It was a life carefully managed, deeply compartmentalized, and built to survive scrutiny. No one in the church ever suspected the pastor was living with a man, let alone in a romantic relationship with one. But despite how carefully he maintained that secret, there was one part of his life he didn't guard as tightly: his daughter. Riley Fushi was born in the final years of her parents' marriage, long before the public scandal that would quietly end it. As their only child, she spent her early years surrounded by ministry culture, Sunday school, front pews, and women in church hats who referred to her as the pastor's little blessing. But after the divorce, all of that faded quickly. Following the separation, Riley's mother left both the church and the state. According to custody filings, Riley was raised by her maternal aunt in Fort Myers, with only occasional supervised visits to Jacksonville during school breaks. Reports from the time show that her father, Pastor Myron Fushi, never contested the arrangement. There are no records of legal disputes regarding visitation or support. He remained in Jacksonville, leading, while his daughter grew up over 300 miles away. Those close to the family described their relationship as formal but distant. Phone calls were infrequent. Birthdays were acknowledged but never celebrated together. Riley attended public school, went on to study nursing, and later worked at a private care facility in Central Florida. She kept a low profile, had no public ties to her father's ministry, and never appeared in photos or newsletters connected to the church. In her early 20s, Riley briefly reconnected with her father. According to phone records and later interviews, their contact resumed after a relative's funeral brought her back to Jacksonville. The interaction was described as cordial but limited. After the service, they shared a meal. It was the first time they had spoken face-to-face in over 6 years. Following that meeting, Riley and Pastor Fouché kept in occasional contact. They exchanged brief messages and spoke once every few months. Friends described Riley as cautious, neither bitter nor openly emotional about her father. She did not attend his church, and he never pushed her to. Their connection was shallow but polite. Professionally, Riley lived a stable life. She rented a small apartment near her workplace, drove a used sedan, and stayed away from social drama. She had a modest circle of friends, was not especially active online, and rarely posted personal updates on public platforms. There were no indications of trouble, no warnings, no hint of the connection that would later unfold. At the time, Riley Fouché was just a quiet woman, working her shifts, minding her life, completely unaware of the secret her father was keeping. Digital records obtained during the investigation showed that sometime in late 2020, a social media message was sent from Devon's account to Riley Fouché. The message was short, casual, and non-specific, an introduction framed as a friendly hello. It appeared to be sent after Devon came across Riley's profile while using a shared device linked to Pastor Fouché's cloud account. There is no evidence that Riley knew who Devon was at the time. Her profile was semi-private, but included enough public content to identify her as a healthcare worker living in Central Florida. Investigators later confirmed that she had received dozens of similar messages from strangers over the years, and there was nothing in Devon's initial approach that raised concern. Riley responded a few days later. The replies were polite and surface level, short comments about work, weekend plans, and common interests. Over the following weeks, the messages became more frequent. Screenshots recovered from Devon's cloud storage showed conversations about books, music, and shared frustrations with long work hours. Nothing in those early exchanges suggested a romantic angle. Investigators noted that Devon kept the tone light, friendly, and non-invasive. He did not reference his personal life, his relationship with Pastor Fouché, or anything connected to the church. To Riley, he appeared to be a normal person reaching out with mutual curiosity. It was during this period that the relationship began to shift. Both parties started messaging more frequently, often late at night, across time zones. Voice notes were exchanged, occasional selfies were shared. According to data from messaging platforms, they began having regular calls by early 2021. At no point did Riley ask Devon how he found her profile. In her later statement, she confirmed she had assumed it was a mutual contact from a church event, or a friend of a friend from her father's past. She admitted that while the connection felt random, it never seemed suspicious. What stood out to investigators was how deliberate Devon had been. He used a clean profile with no photos of Pastor Fouché, no overlapping contacts, and no visible ties to Jacksonville. His account activity was minimal, followed mostly art pages, lifestyle content, and music accounts. It appeared curated to avoid raising red flags. By the time their conversations turned more personal, the digital trail had already become layered. Devon had sent dozens of messages from multiple devices with encrypted backups. Riley, unaware of the deeper connection, had welcomed his attention. Friends she later confided in said she spoke about a new friend who was easy to talk to and mature. The stage had been set. the connection was active. And still, neither Riley nor anyone around her had any idea who Devon really was. The man she was beginning to trust was living in her father's home. There is no record that Riley ever asked direct questions about Devon's living situation, nor any evidence that he volunteered the truth. In her later testimony, she stated that he described himself as between places and frequently traveling. She did not question why they never met at his home. Most of their in-person meetings took place in hotels, restaurants, or out-of-town parks. When asked later why she never pushed to see where he lived, Riley said she assumed he was being cautious about moving too fast. Friends who were aware of the relationship described it as loose but steady. Devon was never introduced formally, and Riley reportedly avoided giving too many details about him. One co-worker recalled Riley saying, "He's private, but he's good to me." There were no public photos, no tagged posts, nothing to suggest to anyone that the man she was seeing was connected to her family in any way. In early 2022, Riley learned she was pregnant. The news, according to her own statement, came as a shock, but not an unwelcome one. She informed Devon shortly after confirming the results. His response was calm and supportive. He did not express panic or hesitation. According to message transcripts, he told her, "That's the best news I've ever heard." From that point forward, their communication changed. While Devon never promised to live with her or raise the child full-time, he remained present in the pregnancy. He accompanied her to one appointment, sent money periodically, and offered emotional support. Riley, who was financially independent, made it clear she didn't expect more than what he could give. She was used to being self-reliant and preferred things to remain simple. That arrangement worked for both of them. No one was asking questions. No one was looking too closely. And for Devon, it meant maintaining two separate lives, one with the pastor and one with the pastor's daughter. The baby was born later that year, a healthy boy. His birth certificate listed Devon's first name as the father. Riley kept the announcement small. No large posts, no family gatherings. Just a quiet message to close friends and a few texted pictures. The child was healthy. Riley was content. But underneath it all, the truth remained buried. Riley still had no idea who Devon really was. She had never visited his home. She had never seen him interact with her father. And Devon had never admitted that he was living with the man she used to call Dad. For Devon, the deception had stretched far beyond a mistake. It was now a double life, fully formed, with a child tying it all together. And it was only a matter of time before one photo would blow everything apart. It was a simple birthday post. It included photos from a small family gathering, her baby boy sitting in Devon's lap, both of them smiling at the camera. She tagged him in the post with a light-hearted caption, "Happy birthday to the sweetest man in my life, the best father to our little one." Riley didn't think twice about sharing the moment. It wasn't an attempt to make a statement. It was just a proud moment of motherhood. Her son playing in the arms of a man who had quietly supported her. She didn't see the danger in posting a photo of her son with his father. After all, Devon had been there for her during the pregnancy, through late-night calls, and the uncertain days ahead. But for Pastor Myron Fushi, that seemingly innocent post was the breaking point. According to reports, Fushi was scrolling through his social media feed late that evening when the post appeared on his screen. At first, he thought it was another update from Riley, but as his eyes scanned the photo, recognition hit him. The background was familiar, the apartment immediately recognizable. More than that, the man in the photo, holding his grandson, was the same man with whom Fushi had shared a secret for nearly 7 years. The image, a simple moment of familial joy, shattered the life Fushi had so carefully concealed. His stomach turned. His mind raced. The quiet, private relationship with Devon, the life he had hidden from his congregation and his family, now connected in an unthinkable way. His daughter, his flesh and blood, had unknowingly entered a relationship with the very man he had been keeping secrets from. What followed in the hours after the post was a storm of confusion and anger. Pastor Fushi did not contact Riley. He didn't reach out to Devon. Instead, he locked himself in his home, staring at the post. The gravity of the situation hit him hard, and in a flood of rage and betrayal, he began planning his next steps. The shock of betrayal quickly turned to violence. The anger was not just at Devon for crossing an unspoken line, but at himself for allowing his daughter to become involved with a man who, unbeknownst to her, had been intimately involved with him. His life, his faith, his very family was now crumbling around him. The truth had come crashing in. It would not take long for the pieces to fall into place. The man he had been hiding from the world was now at the center of his greatest personal tragedy. Fushi couldn't escape it anymore. He had to confront it. But the confrontation would not be one of words. It would be final and deadly. In the 2 days following the birthday post, those closest to Pastor Myron Fushi noticed subtle changes in his behavior. He remained active in his church duties, delivering midweek service and attending prayer meetings. But longtime staff members described him as withdrawn and unnaturally quiet. He canceled 2 counseling sessions and left early from a pastoral visit, an unusual break from routine for a man known for strict consistency. Based on journal entries found in his home after the incident, Fushi had written several pages of emotional conflict in the span of 36 hours. The entries, dated and handwritten, included phrases like double betrayal, nothing is sacred, and he touched what's mine. The writing showed no clear direction, only agitation, confusion, and repeated references to losing control of what he had kept hidden. Forensic investigators later described the emotional tone of those pages as possessive, wounded, and obsessively territorial. What stood out was the absence of any mention of his daughter by name. The entries fixated solely on Devon. Meanwhile, Devon remained unaware of the storm building around him. According to text logs from that period, he had not contacted Pastor Fushi in the 2 days following the post. He responded to Riley's comments with heart emojis and light banter, showing no signs of fear or stress. To him, the post seemed harmless, a sweet moment from a woman who had quietly stood by him. There was no indication that Devon ever thought Pastor Fushi would see the post. By all appearances, he believed the separation between his 2 lives remained intact. But by Friday evening, Pastor Fushi had made a decision. Security footage from a local gun shop confirmed that he entered the premises shortly before closing time and purchased a legally registered handgun with matching ammunition. The clerk later recalled him as calm, polite, and quiet. There was nothing to indicate distress. He left with the weapon concealed and drove home without incident. At 8:04 p.m., he sent a single text to Devon. The message read, "We need to talk. No drama. Just face-to-face." That was the last text he ever sent. Investigators would later conclude that the murder was not spontaneous. It was planned, though not premeditated in a legal sense, driven not by long-standing intent, but by sudden emotional collapse. The truth had been right in front of him, and when the image could no longer be unseen, the man who had hidden so much for so long decided that silence was no longer enough. The confrontation would happen the next morning. At 7:18 a.m. on Saturday morning, Pastor Myron Fushi was seen on surveillance cameras pulling into the parking lot of a quiet apartment complex located 15 minutes from his home. He exited his vehicle calmly, wearing a dark overcoat and carrying what appeared to be a manila folder under his arm. The folder was later found to contain a printed photo of the birthday post and a copy of his daughter's birth certificate. He took the stairs to the third floor and knocked on the door of apartment 3B. Devon answered. What happened next was pieced together through a combination of digital evidence, forensic analysis, and statements from neighboring residents. There were no security cameras inside the apartment, but two neighbors on the same floor reported hearing raised voices just after 7:25 a.m. Not loud enough to make out words, but enough to notice tension. One of them described it as the kind of argument where something felt off. Investigators believe the conversation between Fauci and Devon lasted less than 7 minutes. No signs of a physical struggle were found at the scene, only verbal confrontation. Based on analysis of the bullet trajectory, Devon was standing near the kitchen counter when he was shot. The weapon used was a .38 caliber revolver registered to Fauci. He fired 3 rounds. 2 struck Devon in the upper torso, 1 in the shoulder. Death was declared at the scene. There were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds, no indications of a fight. Pastor Fauci did not remain at the scene. At 7:42 a.m., surveillance footage showed him leaving the building in the same calm manner he arrived. He drove directly to a remote fishing dock on the outskirts of the city and remained parked there for nearly 3 hours. During that time, he did not make any phone calls or send any messages. The investigation into Devon's murder began just hours after his body was discovered by a co-worker. When officers arrived at the scene, they noted the lack of forced entry and the limited number of personal belongings inside the apartment. The living space was neat, the door was locked, and there were no signs of robbery. The only unusual item was a manila folder left on the kitchen counter. Inside the folder were 2 documents, a printed screenshot of a recent social media post and a birth certificate. The post showed Devon holding a young child seated beside a woman identified by name. The caption included a birthday message referring to Devon as the child's father. The birth certificate confirmed the mother as Riley Fauci. That name immediately raised questions. By that point, Pastor Myron Fauci had already been named as a person of interest. A witness in the building had reported seeing him enter the apartment shortly before the shooting, and security footage confirmed his presence at the scene. But the connection to the victim and the motive remained unclear. Detectives retrieved Devon's phone and laptop from the apartment. The devices were unlocked and synced to cloud accounts. A forensic team extracted message logs, contact lists, photos, and archived call history. Within hours, they confirmed that Devon and Pastor Fauci had exchanged thousands of messages over a period of more than 6 years. Their relationship had included shared travel, joint bank transactions, and multiple apartment leases, though none under both names. Most messages were coded or vague in language, never explicitly romantic, but embedded metadata, shared location tags, and overlapping calendar events confirmed a long-term domestic connection between the 2 men. When officers reviewed the same devices for connections to Riley Fauci, the link was just as clear. A separate thread on a messaging app showed hundreds of exchanges between Devon and Riley, many with affectionate language, media attachments, and discussions about their child. There were also photos and videos stored on the device that placed Devon in contact with Riley and the child at multiple times and locations. The overlapping timelines made the sequence unmistakable. Devon had been maintaining 2 simultaneous relationships, one with Pastor Fauci, kept entirely secret from the outside world, and another with the pastor's daughter, who had no knowledge of his connection to her father. The child, born roughly a year before the shooting, was confirmed through the birth certificate as Devon's biological son. Investigators also reviewed Pastor Fouchy's phone and computer after obtaining a warrant. His devices included location history, shared app usage, and recent search records for gun shops. One entry stood out: the birthday post. It had been accessed multiple times from his device in the 48 hours leading up to the murder. One handwritten note was also found in his home. It read, "The moment I saw them, I knew everything was gone." With all evidence compiled, digital correspondence, timeline alignment, financial records, and security footage, law enforcement issued a formal arrest warrant. Fouchy was taken into custody without resistance. At the time of arrest, he made no statements, but investigators later described the case as one of the most disturbing personal betrayals they had ever seen. One hidden in plain sight, only uncovered because of a single photo on a public timeline. The trial began 6 months after the arrest. It was held in a quiet district court in Duval County, with limited observers and no public statements from the court or defense. Pastor Myron Fouchy entered a plea of not guilty. His legal team argued emotional distress, but the prosecution presented a case built entirely on digital evidence, timeline precision, and a documented motive linked directly to the victim's relationship with the pastor's daughter. Riley was called to testify. According to court transcripts, she confirmed that she had no knowledge of her father's relationship with Devon and had never seen the two together. When shown communication logs and financial records, she remained composed, answering questions with quiet restraint. Her only emotional pause came when the birth certificate was entered into evidence and shown beside the printed photo left at the scene. She requested a short break, but returned to complete her testimony. Sheila, the pastor's former wife, was present during key parts of the trial. Though not involved in the crime or its direct aftermath, her presence marked the first time in over a decade that the three individuals, Myron, Riley, and Tamara, had appeared in the same room. According to seated attendees, the pastor looked at his daughter only once. She did not return his gaze. The court found Myron Fouchy guilty of second-degree murder. The verdict was unanimous. He was sentenced to 32 years in state prison, with no eligibility for parole during the first 25. He showed no visible reaction when the sentence was read. At no point during the proceedings did he speak publicly or issue an apology. Riley did not return for the sentencing. Following the trial, she withdrew from known contacts and relocated without notice. Her employer confirmed her departure from the healthcare facility, and no updated records were available under her legal name. Sheila was not seen in court again. The church Pastor Fouchy led for nearly 30 years was quietly closed. The remaining board members issued a short internal memo citing leadership failure and spiritual breach. The building was later sold to a different ministry. No services were held in its final weeks. The child, now a toddler, was left in Riley's sole custody. According to legal filings, no paternity challenge was made. Devon's name remained on the certificate. There were no further claims or guardianship disputes. In the end, the crime left behind no headline, no viral moment, just a fractured family, a locked building, and a boy born into a truth he may never be told. He preached about truth, but built his life on secrets. He lost a wife to betrayal, then became what he once condemned. And in trying to bury one deception, he uncovered another, one that destroyed everyone in his path. A father, a daughter, a child left behind. Some stories don't end in scandal. They end in silence. If this case gripped you, subscribe to True Crime Corner, because the ones no one talks about are the ones you'll never forget.